All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin with a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of their grandchildren. Our Daf Yomi shir in the Schus of Refuah Shlema for Yehuda ben Michal, and our week of learning sponsors Gail and Doug Stanger in the Zuchus and in celebration of the upcoming bar mitzvah of their grandson Akiva this coming Shabbos b'Sha'ah Tova u'Mitzlacha. So we'll say with that, let us begin. So we left off, today's daf is Lamed Gimel 33. Baruch Hashem, we're zochet to have a beautiful shir last night after the fast, and we left off with 3 lines up from the bottom on 32b. Chovel b'chavero. So just to give a 30-second update as to where we're holding right now. Last night, we saw a riveting machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Ula. Specifically, again, and you have a situation where you commit an act, and the act results in dual liability of malchus and mammon, of lashes and financial obligation. So which chiyuv is generated? So Ula said that when there is malchus and mammon, you go with mammon. Rabbi Yochanan says when there's malchus and mammon, you go with malchus. But even Rabbi Yochanan said that there are 2 exceptions to this rule based on the psak of Rabbi Eloi. What were the two exceptions to the rule? So the 2 exceptions were Edim Zomin, which we saw in yesterday's daf, and the second is Chovel B'Chavero. Let's pick up with that now. So Chovel B'Chavero, the Gemara says, Chovel B'Chavero, 3 lines are from the bottom. Nami, Michtik Siv, Kasher Asa Kenye Aselo. So also by Chovel B'Chavero, ultimately again, okay. So by Chovel B'Chavero, so the Torah says as follows. Kasher Asa, what a person has done to someone else, Kenye Aselo. Ultimately, again, that is what is done to them. So the Gemara says, Kain yinosin bo lamali. Now I will say, once again, I have 2 psukim. Right? So pasuk number 1 is, V'ish akiyitin mum ba'amito, kasher asa kenye asa lo. If a person injures his fellow, that which he did shall be done to him. Both say, then the next pasuk is, so again, shever tachas shever, ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein. Torah gets more specific over here. Literally, a breakage instead of a break, or under a breakage, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Kasher yitain mum ba'adam kain yinasein bo. The way you inflict a mum on someone, that will be inflicted to you. Why do you need that second phrase, kain yinasein bo? It's redundant, it's superfluous. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Davar sheyesh bo nesina. It's referring to something which can be given over. I will say, what's an example of something which can be handed over? Umaynihu, mammon, money. So I will say, so from here you see that in the case of Chovel B'Chavero, even though halacha l'maisa there's a chiyuv malchus, there's also what? Going to be a chiyuv mammon. Rabbi Yochanan, my time with Kula. So we'll say, fine. So now we have our 2 schools of thought. The Rabbi Yochanan school of thought, when there's mammon and malchus, we go with malchus, set aside mammon, except for 2 cases. And Ula's school of thought, when there's malchus and mammon, go with mammon, leave aside malchus. Good. Now says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, my time with Ula. Why does Rabbi Yochanan not hold like Ula? Why didn't he hold like Ula? Very simple. He says, Imkain bitalta ervas achoscha lo sigale. Very interesting. Because Rabbi Yochanan holds, if halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you adopt malchus over mammon, then you have essentially negated the lav of ervas achoscha lo sigale, which is the lav of an erva of one's sister. What does that mean? Take a look at the last Rashi in the daf. Imkain tepartarta ba'al achos mi malchus. Because we'll say, effectively, you go ahead and you say that halacha l'maisa, that there's no malchus whenever there's mammon. So we'll say, remember again, let's take a step back. We're talking about one specific case over here. Man violates his sister. So remember again, according to our Mishnah, what's the halacha if a man violates his sister? What's the halacha? Knas. Rabbi Yochanan says, here's the problem. So you're going to tell me you're going to adopt mammon over malchus. The problem with that is then you've effectively negated the lav. Because ultimately, again, violating one's sister is a lav. So a lav almost always generates a chiyuv malchus. So if there's no chiyuv malchus, there's only a chiyuv mammon, you have negated the lav. To which the Gemara says, top of Lamed Gimel, I don't understand. Chovel b'chavero nami. So the Gemara says, 1 second, if that's your logic, that failure to give malchus effectively negates the lav, then you could apply that to any case. Chova b'chaver nami, when a person injures his friend. Imkain bitalta lo Yosef. So in that case over there also, if you go ahead and pay money instead of going ahead and giving malchus, you've violated the law of lo Yosef. Remember we saw this last night. Lo Yosef is the law that is associated whenever you hit someone. What's the law of lo Yosef? A little chazara. What's the law of lo Yosef? That Beis Din is not, right? Whenever Beis Din is going to flog someone, the court physician comes along, assesses the what do we call that guy? The guilty party, right? Assesses the guilty party. Ultimately, how many lashes he could sustain. That's what you give him. If you give him more than that set amount of lashes, you are in violation of Lo Yosef. What's fascinating, the Gemara introduced us to this idea last night, which is that what? Anytime you hit someone, you're effectively in violation of Lo Yosef, which is really interesting because you're giving someone, you're hitting someone in a way that they do not deserve. You're giving them, quote unquote, more than their allotted quota. So the Gemara says, so chava b'chavero, if you make him pay, ultimately again, if you make him pay and not malchus, bital to Lo Yosef. So the Gemara says, bital to Lo Yosef ben Yosef, edim zomin nami. So to be edim zomin, imkein bital to v'hayam bin akos harasha. So I will say, the point the Gemara is making over here is, Rabbi Yochanan, it's a very strange argument to make, that if halacha l'maisa, if you were to hold like ula, then suddenly you feel like you're negating all of these lavin. To which the Gemara says, well, ela edim zomin, efshar l'kiyuma, ben grusha ben chalutza. Now, edim zomin is a little bit different. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, that could be upheld in a case of ben grusha ben chalutza. And I will say, this is a classic makas case. Remember again, normally edim zomin are subject to what? Reciprocal punishment. There are exceptions. What's the exception to the rule? If edim come along and say, imagine two witnesses come along and say, Reuven, everyone thinks that Reuven is a Kohen. Reuven's not a Kohen, his mother's a grusha. Okay, then witnesses come along and they say to the first set of witnesses, there's no way you can know that because of whatever, you were with us or you never lived here, however they discredit it. We don't say that we make the edim themselves into ben grusha ben chalutz. In other words, let's say it happens to the edim or kohanim. So we don't apply reciprocal punishment in that case, but there is a din ultimately of what? Of malchus. So I will say, so again, the point the Gemara is making over here is an edim zomin, you could have malchus. Chovel bechaver nami, ika lekiyuma. In the case of chovel bechavero, you could also come up with a case of malchus. How? Kigon sheikho haka she'ein ba shaveh pruta. We saw this in yesterday's daf also. What's an example of a situation where everyone would agree that in chovel bechavero you'd be chayiv malchus and not mammon? In a case where the injury does not generate a financial liability. When doesn't injury generate financial liability? When it's an injury that is less than a shaveh pruta. So the Gemara says, achoso nami ika lekiyuma. So we'll say similarly again in the case of achoso, you could also come up with a case where everyone would agree that there's a din of malchus and not mammon. And when is that? Bachosa bogeres. Oh, we'll say we've seen this a number of times already. The din of knas is only in what situation? Nara. Knas does not apply to bogeres. Incredible. So Amalek Rabbi Yochanan would say, Hai tachas asher ina. So we'll say, so therefore again, this is why. So we're fine. Hi Rabbi Yochanan, let's go. Rabbi Yochanan. Hai tachas asher ina mi baile l'chida abaye. So first of all, say, remember again, if you remember in yesterday's daf, so Ula's drasha, right? We were trying to figure out Ula, right? Remember what's Ula's position? Ula's position is that halacha l'maisa, whenever you have malchus and mammon, what do? You take them out, so to speak. In other words, you chay for the malchus, chay for the mammon, pater for the malchus. If you remember, we went through a series of drushas to try to figure out how Ula gets there. The final drasha that the Gemara settled on was on the very top of Lamed Beis Amud Beis, where the Gemara made a gzera shava of tachas, right? Tachas. It was tachas asher ina, which ultimately again is the tachas when a man violates a woman, and then ultimately again ayin tachas ayin. And we understood that just like ayin tachas ayin, everyone agrees. I will say, what is that? That's mammon. Even though again ayin tachas ayin means I injured someone, So when I injured someone, ultimately, there's going to be what? There's going to be mammon and malchus. But yet, tachas, over here by ayin tachas ayin, means mammon and not malchus. So too, again, tachas asher by the case of violation, means mammon and not malchus. That was Ula's gzeir shava. Now the Gemara says, Amach Rabbi Yochanan, I reject that. I'll tell you why. Because actually, I need that pasuk for a different drasha. What's the drasha? Damar Abaye Amar Kra Tachas Asher Ina. When the pasuk says Tachas Asher Ina, what does that mean? Hai Tachas Asher Ina Michlal Diika Boshes Upigam. So we'll say this is very interesting. The fact that it says Tachas Asher Ina, ultimately that tells us that there is a din of boshes and pigam in this scenario as well. Remember again, Abba say, what's boshes? Boshes is humiliation. What's pigam? Pigam, depreciation. Boshes and pigam. V'ula, so where would Ula get this from? So the Gemara says here, if you look at, all right, let's go back there. V'ula, nafkale midirava. Where does Ula learn out that in addition to knas, there's also going to be boshes and pigam? So Ula nafkale midirava. He learns that from Rava. Da'am Rava amakra v'nasan ha'ish hashochiv imala avianara chamishim kesef. So let's listen to this. By the penalty payment, the Torah says that the man will give to the aviha nara. He will give to the father of the girl 50 silver pieces. Hanas shchiva chamishim. The penalty payment of the 50 silver pieces is dafka for the act of violation. Mechlal diika boshes upagam. Prabhu said we learn from here that there are going to be other forms of payment as well. So both say, so again, this is our machlokes. So the Gemara leaves off over here. We're not finished yet. But again, for this moment, the Gemara is going ahead and leaving this machlokes between Ula and Rabbi Yochanan as it is. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Edim Zomin, Mamona Mishalmi, Umilka Lo Lucky. So we'll say now we're going to delve into some of the specific cases. Rabbi Elazar says, Edim Zomin, so again, we'll call them false witnesses, but you understand, of course, Edim Zomin are a unique brand of false witnesses where we apply reciprocal punishment. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Edim Zomin, Mamona Mishalmi, Umilka Lo Lucky. Rabbi Eliezer says, Edim Zomin themselves, ultimately, again, Mamona Mishalmi, they pay money. Milka lo lucky. They ultimately, again, they do not get malchus. Now, we'll say this is fact. Let's go back. Now, this was a concept that everyone agreed on. Right? Because remember, again, let's take a step back. Even Rabbi Yochanan, let's go back. Rabbi Yochanan, what's Rabbi Yochanan's shita? When there's a chiyuv of mammon and malchus, what's the halacha? You get the malchus, don't get the mammon. Even Rabbi Yochanan agreed that there were two exceptions to that rule. What were the two exceptions to the rule? Edim zomin, chovel bechavero. So let's talk about this in just a moment. Why don't Edim Zomamin get malchus? Now I will say, the Gemara already teased this out a little bit because Edim Zomamin can't get hasra. Hasra means a warning. In general, the halacha is that in order to go ahead and incur liability for any particular infraction, you have to be warned. You have to be warned, and a warning means, warned by Edim, what you're about to do is asr. Ultimately, and if you do so, it's going to carry the following penalty. So the Gemara says something amazing. So do you know why Edim Zomamin ultimately go? Because I will say, I'm sorry, let's just take one step back. Edim Zomamin really should get both. Why should they get both? Because I will say the two liabilities are coming from two different places. Right? Remember again, let's go back. Where does the Chiyav Malchus come from? Chiyav Malchus for Edim Zomamin comes from where? Right? Ninth commandment. Lo sana brecha ishaker. Don't bear false testimony. Where does mammon come from in Edim Zomin, assuming that it's a mammon case? Edim Zomin. In other words, it's two different lavim. Edim Zomin is its own halacha of reciprocal punishment. So really, this case would be ripe for two distinct punishments because halacha lamaisa, the two liabilities stem from two different lavim. There's not an overlap over here. Yet, everyone seems to agree that Edim Zomin will pay mammon, they won't get malchus. Why? Because they're not subject to hasra. So let's talk about this. So the Gemara says, Amarava. So I'll tell you why. Teda, this is fascinating. Nisri buhu emas. Let's think about this just a moment. When can you warn Edim Zomin. When can you possibly warn them? Nisri Buhu Meikara. So I will say, if you warn them, now Meikara, if you look at Rashi, it's a little bit further down in Rashi, like right across from Tosus, like Ella. Meikara, Yom Osha Kodim Sheidu Eidos. So I will say, let's say somehow you know that two guys are thinking about giving testimony. So you give them a warning, you give them Hasra a day before they give the testimony. 24 hours, or even an hour, some amount of time before they give the testimony. So what's the problem with that? So the Gemara says, Amri Ishtalin. So here's the problem. By the time they get around to giving the testimony, they can claim that what? They forgot the Hasra. As I will say, generally we assume, when does Hasra take place? When does Hasra take place? B'shas Maisa, at the time when the act is occurring. So when are you going to warn them? If you're going to warn them an hour or a day before they give the testimony, so they could claim, we forgot. Okay, Nesr b'shas Maisa, this is fascinating. If you go ahead and you warn them literally at the moment that they're about to give the testimony, what's going to happen? Parshi v'lo misadi. What's going to happen? They're just not going to testify. Now, boss, you say to yourself, great, they're not going to testify, that's fantastic. Now, boss, just to be clear, when you're giving witnesses warning, right? Obviously, I don't know their Eidim Zomumin, right? Why am I giving witnesses why am I giving witnesses a warning? Why? Because again, I want to make sure people know not to lie. So we'll see, here's the problem. Imagine witnesses show up and in Beis Din, and they're about to give testimony. And right before they give testimony, we tell them, by the way, if you're a liar, first of all, it's a lav, and if you're Eidim Zom, you're going to get reciprocal punishment. We'll say, what are the witnesses going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to turn right back around and walk out, right? For two reasons. Number one, because I will say what that does is it casts a pall of suspicion upon the witnesses. You don't trust them. We're here to give testimony. You don't trust us? You don't trust us? So look at Rashi just a moment. Parashi v'lo misadi, afilu emes. Even if they're really going to tell the truth, hoil va'anu chashudim be'einechem ma lanu v'latzara. I will say this is absolutely fascinating. If the witnesses feel that they are suspect in the eyes of the Beis Din, they're going to say, why should we do it? First of all, it's offensive. It's offensive. You don't believe me? What have I ever done to give you pause about my credibility? So if you don't believe me, what do I need this for? Which I will say is such a profound lesson on two levels. About number one, always giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's important to know, working on Ben Adam L'Chavero doesn't end with Tisha B'Av, right? Still there's a din of Ben Adam L'Chavero all year around. To be done l'kafschus. And it's important for people to know that you believe in them, because people know when you don't believe in them, and people know when you suspect them, and people know when you don't really hold of their credibility. So to give people the benefit of the doubt. The other piece is, if you make it too difficult for people to do the right thing, they won't do it. You have to make it easy for people to do the right thing. See here the Gemara says, if you throw up this roadblock and you go ahead and you deliver this hasra, right before they give the act, the person is going to say, what do I need this for? I'm coming to help. Right? I'm coming to give testimony. Testimony obviously is there for benefit. But lamaisa, if you feel that I'm suspect, forget it, I'm out. Credible yisod. Listen, by the way, Shas is filled with examples like this, that if you want someone to do the right thing, you have to make it easy for them. The most notable example of this is what we call the takanas hashavin, which is a halacha that says that if a person is a career thief and they want to go ahead and do tshuva, fascinating halacha. What's the halacha? They don't have to return the stolen objects. We let them do tshuva without returning the stolen object, like amnesty, right? We don't. Why? Because I will say, if someone is a career thief and they want to do tshuva and they have to return the stolen objects, what's going to happen? They're going to have nothing. So if it's a choice between being pious and having nothing, most of us choose having stuff. Right? That's just the way that it is. Chazal understood, if you want to facilitate tshuva, you have to make it easy. People want to do the right thing, but most of us can't do the right thing if it's too hard. So Chazal do what they do in order to facilitate, because society has a vested interest in people doing the right thing. So we want people to give eidos. So if you give them hasra right as they're about to give the testimony, forget it. So therefore, we'll say, watch this. So therefore, to give hasra sometime before they give the testimony, they can claim they forgot. To go ahead and give hasra right before they give the testimony, they're just going to walk away. So listen to this. What's the other possibility? So the Gemara says, Nisri b'hula basof. So maybe we should give them hasra right after they give the testimony. My dahava hava. What was. They will say, by the way, this is like a life mantra. My dahava hava. What was. We'll say the best way to live life. You can't control the past. The only thing you have control over is what is in front of you. My dahava hava, what was, move on. So therefore, I will say, this is what's interesting. So therefore, it turns out, really interesting, there's no way to give proper hasra to Eidim Zomamin. Because there's no way to give proper hasra to Eidim Zomamin, therefore what? They can never be subject to malchus. Ultimately, again, to mammon, which is the reciprocal punishment, they will be subject to, but no malchus. Maskef la abaye. So I said, I don't understand. I have an idea. V'nisri bahu b'soch kedei dibor. Oh, interesting. Why don't you go ahead and give asra to them, what we call soch kedei dibor. We'll say, what's toch kedei dibor? Toch kedei dibor means that when you say something, and then something is said within the immediate aftermath of that statement. What we call, or toch kedei dibor is the amount of time that it takes you to say, Shalom alecha Rabbi Umori, so a couple of seconds, which is essentially saying anything you say after a couple of seconds of something you said previously is attached to that initial statement. So generally, the way toch kedei dibur works, I'll give you a simple example. I pick up my cup of coffee and I say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. And then I realize, oh no, shakon bidvaro. So as long as I amend that phrase within a few moments after my initial one, it works. Toch kedei dibur gives you the ability to qualify. If I'm making a brei pri hagafen at 6 o'clock in the morning, there might be other issues, right? But lamaisa, if I amend that statement, if I amend that statement quickly enough, then halacha lamaisa, that works. So the Gemara floats a fascinating idea over here. Why not just give them the hasra toch kedei dibur? In other words, let the Eidim give their eidos, and right after they give their eidos, we give our hasra. Take a look at Rashi. We're about 4 lines up from before Rashi gets wide, 5 lines up. Nisrei behu b'soch kedei dibur, la'achar she'idu, t'toch kedei dibur, kedibur dami, v'yecholim lachzar. So go ahead, we'll say the same way that if Eidim give eidos, toch kedei dibur, they could retract. So why not go ahead and just give them the hasra, toch kedei dibur as well. Maskif l'ravacha b'rei dravika, v'nistri b'hu meikara, v'nirmaz b'hu ramizi. Or, here's what else you could do. Give them the hasra sometime beforehand. And then you were afraid that if you give it to them beforehand, what's going to happen? They're going to forget. So remind them. Literally, motion to them. And I will say, sometimes you tell someone something, and you're afraid they're going to forget, or they have forgotten. And so you don't need to say the whole thing again. It's good. You don't have to say the whole thing again. This is okay. You could apply this to different relationships, right? You don't have to say the whole thing. Is sometimes a little remez, just like a little remez, a little hint, a little something, a little gesture reminds the person of that thing. So why not go ahead, warn the witnesses, give them hasra sometime beforehand, and then at the time of the edus, just go ahead and kind of motion, hint to them, and it'll remind them. So the Gemara says, Hadar Amrabaye, lav milsi hida amri. Afterwards, Abai came along and said, none of that doesn't work. I'll tell you why. So the Gemara says, because it will say it's a different issue. If you really think that Eidim Zomin require Hasra, first of all, if you look at Rashi, Lav Milsi da Amri, second Y line in Rashi, Shehu Eidim Zomin Tzrich Hasra. Abai comes along and says, I think this whole thing is flawed. Eidim Zomin don't really need Hasra. They don't really need Hasra. Why? The Gemara says, Eidim Zomin Tzrich Hasra, Kilo masrinan bahu, lo katlinan lahu. Because we'll say, if that's the case, if Eidim Zomin really needed Hasra, that would mean, in a case where you did not deliver Hasra, then what? You wouldn't be able to execute them. In other words, we'll say, let's just take a capital case. Witnesses are coming along and saying that Reuven killed Shimon. Let's say it turns out, second set of witnesses come up, say to the first set of witnesses, you could not have seen what you claim to have seen, because you were with us. Okay, so what does the halach of Eidim Zomin now say? First set of witnesses, you tried to get Reuven executed, now we're going to execute you. So Rabbi says, if that's the case, that Eidim Zomin require Hasra, then in a case where we did not give them Hasra, you would not be able to carry out the reciprocal punishment. Rabbi says, to which the Rabbi says, that makes no sense. Mi'ika midi, the inhu bai katal below Hasra, the inhu ba Hasra. So Rabbi says, let's play this out. Right? The Eidim were trying to execute Ruvain for having killed Shimon even without Hasra. So that's what they were trying to do. Now, we're going to go ahead and spare the Eidim Zomim because they didn't have Hasra. The Gemara says, Haba inan, v'asisim lo kasher zamam, lasos li achiv eleka. Problem is supposed to be reciprocal, which means we do to the witnesses, that's what they tried to do to the defendant. They tried to have him executed without Hasra. We should therefore be able to execute them without Hasra as well. So as Rabbi say, what Abai essentially is saying is that Eidim Zomin is a unique case. In general, the truth is Eidim Zomin is a unique concept, the concept of reciprocal punishment. But Halacha L'Maisa, Abai is saying it's even more, because the whole point of Eidim Zomin is complete reciprocity. Well, part of that reciprocity, part of what they wanted to do is they wanted to execute an innocent person, which obviously means that the defendant didn't have Asra. So reciprocity therefore warrants that they should be executed even without Hasra as well. Therefore, Abaye says, whereas the concept of Hasra applies to all other areas, not all, but we'll call it all areas of halacha, by Eidim Zomimin, there's no concept of Hasra. Incredible. Maskif Rav Sama Braid Rav Yirmiyah, Elameata, Ben Grusha Ben Chalutz, Dlo Mekasha Zamam Kamis Rabbi, the boy Hasra. So I will say if that's the case. Remember, we always go back. This is the first case of Makkos. First case of Makkos. So the Gemara says, what about the case of Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza, where we understand that halacha l'maisa, you can't apply reciprocity. Or as I will say, this is the case where Eidim show up. They say that a particular guy will call him Aaron. Aaron is not a Kohen. Aaron is a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. Right? So we'll say, what's the halacha? Let's say it turns out that the Eidim are Eidim Zomimin. So our reciprocal punishment, what should we do to them? Make them a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. We don't do that. Remember, what's the drush of the Gemara there? The Gemara says, because why? If you make them Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza, then what does it do? Impacts future generations. And the Gemara darshans, Va'asisem lo kasher zamam, lo v'lo lebanav. Reciprocal punishment could only impact the witnesses themselves, not the offspring of the witnesses. So therefore, again, I will say, Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza is an exception to the reciprocity rule. So if that's the case, because they're the exception, maybe Allah L'maisa, in Dafka, the case of Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza, maybe you should require Hasra there. Amekra mishpat echad yelachem, mishpat hashav l'kulchem. Now you're not going to do that. Or I was supposed to say, you're not going to start making that. In some cases of Eidim Zomamin, there's Hasra. Other cases of Eidim Zomamin, there's not Hasra. Mishpat echad, there's got to be one uniform halacha. Rav Shisha Breid Rav Idi Amar Chava bechaber nami mamon mishalim milka lo laki mihacha. Both says this. So Shisha Breid Rav Idi also said Chava bechavero, which Rabbi say was the other exception case of Rabbi Law. Damaging your friend is also a case where you'll pay money, but you won't get malchus. Where do we know that? From Mihacha, v'chiyinatzu anashim v'nagfu ishahara v'yatzu yiladeha. So I will say the Torah is talking about over here. There's two different cases. Case number one is two men are fighting. They shove a pregnant woman, and she ends up miscarrying. So I will say now in case number one, the woman doesn't die. No one dies in this case. The miscarriage occurs. So the Gemara says, what's ta'alacha? There's a financial penalty, ultimately, again, for having caused the miscarriage. V'amr b'lazar, b'matzos shebemisa hakasov medaber. So Rabbi Elazar says, what's the case of Bosai? The case of the two guys who are fighting, right? We'll call them Reuven and Shimon are fighting, right? Ultimately, again, we'll call it Reuven knocks over a pregnant woman, causes her to miscarry, but no one dies. No one dies in the exchange. So what's the halacha? So ultimately, Reuven now has to pay damages to the woman. So the Gemara Rabbi Elazar says, we're talking about a case where Reuven and Shimon are fighting with the intention to kill each other. B'matzos shebemisa. They're coming to kill each other. So the Gemara says, "D'chsev ve'im ason yihiyah v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh." You're supposed to remember again, what does the next pasuk say? The next pasuk says, but 1 second. If Reuven and Shimon are fighting and ultimately they end up killing the pregnant woman, v'im ason yihiyah v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh. You're supposed to say, you see that because they end up killing someone, it must be that the context in which they are fighting is they're trying to kill each other. They're trying to kill each other, but instead of killing each other, they end up killing someone else. So, hey, Chidami, what's the case, Rabbi? Say, what's the case? So the Gemara, look at Rashi for just a moment. B'matzo shemisa shemiskavein haya lahargo hakasav medaber d'chsiv im ason yihiyah shemesa isha v'nasata nefesh v'afa pishlo niskavein el lechavero v'ashmo'ir niskavein laro gezeh v'hara gezeh chayiv. So I will say, so interestingly enough, remember again, So let's just play out the case number 2. Case number 2, Reuven and Shimon are fighting. And they're fighting with the intention to what? To what? Kill each other. But instead, Reuven doesn't kill Shimon. He ends up killing Rachel. So what does the Torah say? V'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh. So there's a couple of things that's happening over here. It sounds like what's going to happen. Reuven now is executed for having killed Rachel. Even though what, Rabbi say? Now what's the novelty here? Even though what? It wasn't his intention. Now he wanted to kill someone, to be clear. He wanted to kill Shimon, right? But he did not have in mind to kill Rachel. Nevertheless, it sounds like he is liable for killing Rachel. So let's analyze this. Hechi dami. What's the case? Idala asru be'amai miktal. If Reuven didn't receive hasra, and I was about saying, if Reuven wasn't warned, right? Witnesses see that Reuven's trying to kill Shimon. So if witnesses didn't warn Reuven, you're not allowed to kill someone, and if you do, that's a capital offense. You'll be executed. So if there was no hasra, amai miktal. They both say a Beis Din doesn't put someone to death without hasra. Elapshita de asrube. Rather, it's clear that what they must have warned Reuven. But I will say, but remember, what was the hasra for Reuven? What was the hasra? The hasra is don't kill Shimon. Umusra ledavar chamer have musra ledavar akal. And I will say, what do you learn from here? That when you receive hasra, ultimately again for something chamer, that works as hasra even for something more kal. Because I will say, we know the halacha that when Reuven means to kill Shimon and he ends up killing Rachel, Reuven is not executed for that. You are never executed for a non-premeditated act. Instead, what has to happen? Nefesh tachas nefesh in this context means what? Mammon. Means money. Look at Rashi. Havi muso davar akal shim yakenu v'lo yamos yilake v'afilu hachi am rachmana d'chi ein shem chiyuv misa ye'anish d'mei v'lados v'afagav d'ika hasra l'malkus alma mishalim ve'eno loke. So we'll say the point over here is you see that halacha l'maisa Reuven is being warned for one thing. Now, the truth is, let's go back to the previous case for just a moment. Not case 2. Actually, I strike that. Let's leave aside nefesh tachas nefesh just a moment. Let's go back to case number 1. Case number 1 is we see Reuven about to kill Shimon. He's trying to kill Shimon, right? What do witnesses do? They give hasra, and they probably should intervene as well. But okay, right now they're focused on the hasra, right? So they give hasra. Reuven now let it kill Shimon. Well, so now what happens? Reuven doesn't kill Shimon. Instead, what does he end up doing? He ends up knocking over Rachel, and what happens? She miscarries. Then I will say, what's the halacha in that case? Financial restitution. Then I will say, what's fascinating about this case? Reuven got hasra for what? For murder. Don't kill Shimon. Baruch Shimon doesn't kill Shimon, but he ends up causing financial damages, and we make him pay. What do you see from there? That halacha l'maisa, if you get hasra for a more severe act, that hasra covers a less severe act as well. Reuven got hasra not to kill. Baruch Hashem, he doesn't kill. He ends up injuring, causing financial damage. That same hasra will make him liable ultimately again for financial damages. But I will say the point over here is that what do you see? You see from here also in the case of financial damages, chovel bechavero, because that's what's happening. Reuven is injuring Rachel. What do you see from here? That halacha l'maisa, when the case where there's malchus and mammon, what do you get? Mammon and not malchus. You pay the money, you don't get malchus. Beautiful. So the Gemara says, Maske for Ravashi, Mimai de Muslo Davar Chama Havi Muslo Davar Akal. Honestly, how do you know that? How do you know that halacha l'maisa, when you get hasra for something more chamer, that hasra works for a less severe infraction as well? Dilma lo havi. Maybe it doesn't work. Imtim salomar havi. And if you say it does work, Mimai de Misa Chamura, how do you know that death, right? Hasra for death is considered to be more chamer. I will say, watch this. Dilma Amud Beis, Dilma Malkus chamer. Maybe Rabbi will say, this is incredible. Maybe Malkus is more chamer than death. The Rabbi will say, how could Malkus be more chamer than death? Rabbi will say, listen to this, because Rav says, Il Malei Nagdua Lechananya Mishal Va'azarya Palchu Litzalma. Rabbi will say, get ready for this. The story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah is a story by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had made a great statue of himself, and he had commanded that everyone bow down to it. The 3 great prophets, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, refused to bow. And as a result, they were thrown into the Kivshana Eish fiery furnace, and again, a miracle occurred, they were saved. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Had Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah gotten Malchus, which means they're both saying, had they been tortured, had they been tortured, they would have bowed. Incredible. Gemara is making an amazing statement. In other words, they were ready to give their lives al Kiddush Hashem, because the assumption is if you give your life by being thrown into a fiery furnace, then what? It's over. It's over. Had they had to endure sustained torture, they would have bowed. So I will say, now what is the Gemara trying to convey over here? The Gemara is trying to convey something amazing, that maybe Malchus is considered to be more Chomer than Misa, because Misa, especially Misa's Beis Din, are quick, right? With the exception maybe of Skila, because Skila you have to get thrown off the roof, and if you don't die from impact, then there's okay, right? But Lamaisa, generally they're quick. Malchus perhaps is considered to be a more sustained or a prolonged form of punishment. So it's incredible. Maybe Malchus is more Chomer. So in other words, in this case, where Reuven gets Hasra, ultimately again for going ahead, don't kill Shimon. So we're saying, you see from here that he doesn't kill Shimon, he ends up injuring Rachel, so he has to go ahead and get Malchus, or he has to pay. You see from here that Allah Lamaisa Hasra for something Chomer works with something less, something Kal. Maybe not. Maybe Misa's Kal, Malchus is Chomer. Rabbi says incredible. Amrli Rav Sama Berid Rav Ashi, Amrli Rav Sama Berid Rav Ashi, Rav Ashi. V'lo shani lacha ben akash yesh lacha kitzva la'akash she'en la kitzva. No, that's not fair. So Rabbi say there's a big difference between torture and Malchus. What's the big difference? So Rabbi say, what's the whole chap of torture? The fact that you don't know when it's going to end. We should never know from such things, but the fact that you never know when it's going to end, that's what breaks a person's spirit. But Lemaisa, Malchus, what do you always know about Malchus? You know, we'll say again, from the beginning, you know how many lashes you're going to get. I will say, by the way, what an incredible yesod. That the truth is, people could handle things in life when they know that there's an end. And we know this from our own lives. Sometimes the most difficult things that we have to encounter is when we encounter a challenge and I don't know when it's going to be over. That's often when circumstances can break people. I just don't know when it's ever going to end. But if you give me a challenge, and I know the challenge has a shelf life, it has a beginning, it has an end, it has a start line, a finish line, as difficult and grueling as it may be, I can muster up the strength to get to the other side of that. So the Gemara just says, it's not a fair comparison. Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah, both said, by the way, which is an incredible statement, Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah would have broken. They would have ultimately worshipped the idol, although I want to point out, it's a whole discussion whether or not the statue of Nebuchadnezzar was Avodah Zarah. According to many opinions, Tosas brings this down. It wasn't Avodah Zarah. It was just self-aggrandizement. Nebuchadnezzar wanted people, pledging their fidelity to him, not as a deity, just as a king. Okay, but leaving that aside, so halacha l'maaseh, the Gemara says, Malchus is not torture. Torture is when there's no kitzvah, there's no amount, there's no set amount. Malchus is a set amount. So therefore, I will say, the proof that we had before is still intact, namely, that Hasra for something more Chomer ultimately again goes ahead and works for what? Something more Kal. Maskif Rav Yaakov Nar Pakod. So Rav Yaakov Nar Pakod raised the kasha. Hanichal Rabbanan the Amri Nefesh Mamish. So it's according to the Rabbanan who say Nefesh Tachas Nefesh. Right? In the case, ultimately, again, where Reuven's about to kill Shimon, instead of killing Shimon, what does he do? He kills Rachel. So according to the Rabbanon who say Nefesh Tachas Nefesh literally means that we're ready to go ahead and execute Reuven. El Rabbi Da'amar Mamon, but according to Rabbi who says that no, Nefesh Tachas Nefesh doesn't mean Nefesh, it means Mamon, it means money. Because remember again, the problem with saying Nefesh Tachas Nefesh is what? Reuven didn't have intention to kill Rachel, he had intention to kill Reuven, to kill Shimon. He learns it from here. So we'll say this is an incredible case. Here we go. Reuven goes ahead and gets into a fight with Shimon and injures him in a very severe way. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? So the Torah says that if Shimon recovers from his injuries, if Shimon gets back up, and walks around on his own strength, ultimately, again, Reuven is what's the word? Vinika. Cleared. He's cleared of liability. In other words, I will say vinika makeh, which sounds like also Reuven's not put to death. I will say, do we ever think for a moment that ultimately, again, right, is there ever a case where Reuven would be executed if Shimon's not dead? In other words, the only time you get execution, Rabbi say, is when you kill someone. So of course, Vinikam, okay, what's the halamina? To which the Gemara says, Elam Alamed is fascinating. Shechovshin also. They will say when Reuven beats up Shimon and he really hurts him very badly to the point that we're not sure if Shimon's going to survive. What do we do? We incarcerate Reuven. Incredible, so we incarcerate Reuven. Shechov Shinoso. We incarcerate him. V'imis Katlinale. And we wait to see what happens with Shimon. If Shimon ends up dying as a result of the injuries sustained at the hands of Reuven, then what? We'll execute Reuven. V'ilomis, but if Shimon doesn't die, Shifto Yitein V'rapo Yirape. Then ultimately again Reuven will be on the hook for compensatory damages. To which the Gemara says, Hechi Dami. What's the value? I'll point out there are very few cases in halacha where we use jail, right? If you notice in halacha, jail is only used to figure out what to do with a person. Why? For a very simple reason. The halachic penal code understood long ago that putting someone in a cell for a prolonged amount of time has absolutely no rehabilitative effect. In fact, the only thing it does is exacerbates whatever internal problems this person is already grappling with. So the only time we ever see a jail cell used is when we don't know what to do with someone. So we'll say, what's the case? Hechi Dami, Idalo Asrube, if at the end of the day there was no Hasra, then I'm my miktal. So we'll say, if there was no Hasra before Reuven went ahead and almost killed Shimon, then ultimately again, why would Reuven be executed? Elapshita de Asrube. Rather, it has to be that what? They warranted. Now we'll say, what was the Asra? Reuven, you're about to kill Shimon, don't kill him, it's Asr. So what do you see here, Rabbi? So what's the case? Baruch Hashem, not Baruch Hashem, Reuven beats up Shimon, almost kills him. Baruch Hashem, Shimon survives. What happens when Shimon survives? What does the Torah say? Rak shifto yitain v'rapo yirapeh. What does Reuven have to pay? Compensatory damages. Rabbi say, Reuven's paying compensatory damages based on what kind of hasra? Based on what kind of hasra? Based on hasra what? Don't kill. What do you see from here? Elapshita to asrube umusra l'davar chamer musra l'davar akal v'amrachmana shifto yitim rapo yirapeh. What do you see from here? That Allah l'mayis when you get hasra for something more chamer, that hasra works for something more kal as well. Maskif Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi raises a kasha. Mi maidim musra l'davar chamer havi musra l'davar akal. How do you know that that's true? Dilma lo havi, maybe not. Then tim salomar havi. And if you want to say, but look in this case. We're warning Reuven, don't kill Shimon. So Reuven beats up Shimon, almost kills him. Shimon doesn't die. Based on that hasra, we're going to make Reuven pay. So that shows you that hasra for something more chama works for something more kal. Mimai demisa chamura. How do you know that a death penalty is more chamer? Dilma malchus chamer. Both say same Gemara we had before. Maybe malchus is more chamer. After all, the amarav ilmali nagdua lachalani mishav azariya palchulit salma. Because after all, Rav said that had Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah been tortured, they would have bowed down to the idol. So, right, death they were willing to endure, because death is a one-time event. Torture they couldn't have. So what do you see? You see that maybe we should say that Malchus is more chamer, ultimately again than me. So Rav Sama, Braid Rav Ashi, the Rav Ashi, Ba'amrilei, Rav Sama, Braid Rav Ashi, the Rav Ashi, V'lo shani l'cha bin akash yesh l'ha kitzvah, la'akash she'in l'ha kitzvah. That's not fair. I will say Malchus is not torture. Torture is something without an end, right? Malchus has an end, and therefore, again, by definition, Misa will be more chamer than Malchus. Maskef Rav Mari, Mimai Dvemezid, Vinake Mikatla. How do you know that this is a case of Mazid? And ultimately, again, Vinika means from a death penalty. Dilma b'shogeg v'nika migalus. Maybe some had a case of shogeg, and nika ultimately means from galus. To which the Gemara says, Kash. The Gemara just raises, how do you know that over here the case is where the hasra was for mazid and killing? Maybe the hasra ultimately again was shogeg and galus. Ultimately kasha. Rabbi will say, what ends up coming out from this sugya is something really amazing. So remember, we leave off with our fundamental machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Ula, that when there's Malchus and Mammon, ultimately again, Ula says, you get Mammon, not Malchus. Rabbi Yochanan, you get Malchus and not Mammon. Exceptions to that rule, Chavo bechavero, Eidim zomamin. We also learn Eidim zomamin, interesting and unique case, that what? Halach l'maisa, don't get hasra. And again, I will say over here, you see that halach l'maisa, the Gemara ends off with the concept, or tries to prove the concept, that hasra'ah for something more chamer, ultimately what? Works for something more kal. I'll just end off with one last piece in the last 30 seconds we have, an incredible Musar Haskell. He will say, if you notice this Gemara, Chanani Mishal Nazari, is such a striking Gemara. The Gemara says, Ilmali Nagdul Chanani Mishal Azariya Palchul Salma. Had Chananya, Mishal, and Azariah been tortured, they would have bowed down to the idol. It was only because they were given the choice of death or bowing, they chose death, because death would have been instantaneous, right? Death would have been, so they were ready to do that, but could not have endured torture. So we know this. So what happens? What happens with the story? The story is that they're thrown into the fiery furnace. That's what happened. So we'll say, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? The Ribono Shel Olam never puts us in a situation that we cannot handle. See, I will say, I know it sounds cliche, and it sounds a little bit trite, right? That God never gives you challenges that you cannot handle. But I will say, just because it sounds cliche and it's often overused, doesn't mean it's not true. The Ribono Shel Olam realized that Hananya, Mishael, and Azariah could not handle torture. They could handle dying al Kiddush Hashem. That they could do. So the Ribono Shel Olam only gave them what they could handle and would never ever chas v'shalom put them in a situation where ultimately they were being set up for failure. And if it was true for Hananya, Mishael, and Azariah, it's true for us. And it should give us chizuk. For when we face overwhelming and daunting circumstances, sometimes we think we're in over our head. Sometimes we think we can't handle it. Kesuvos lamed gimel amud beis. Amalei nagdua lechanayim mishav Azariah palchol itzalma. Kadosh Baruch Hu realized they couldn't handle torture, therefore did not put them in a context of torture. Realized they could handle death al Kiddush Hashem, gave them that nisayon. The Ribono Shel Olam only gives us what we can handle. Shkach Chabosai. All right, Chavra Zoom, have a wonderful day, everyone. Richard, Moshe, Ben Sion, good to see everyone. Bennett, Paul, Michael, have a great day.